After her billionaire husband beat her, she went to bed without a word. The next morning, he woke up to the smell of pancakes and saw the table filled with treats. He said, "Good, you finally understood." But when he saw who was sitting at the table, his expression changed instantly. "Hi, my beautiful, loyal, and great family. Welcome back to your own family channel, Mr. Peter's Stories. May the Almighty bless every woman with a strength that nothing on earth can break, a heart so pure it heals everyone around her, and a dignity that shines brighter than the morning sun. You are the pillars of love, the gentle hands that hold families together, the silent warriors who carry pain yet spread only warmth. I pray your homes overflow with peace, your days rise with hope, and your paths be guided by blessings that never end. May every worry fade from your life, every closed door open for you, and every tear be replaced with joy. You deserve heavens of love, comfort, and respect for all that you give without asking anything back. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." The last time Joel Pace hit his wife, she didn't scream. She smiled. That should have terrified him. But Joel Pace woke up that Wednesday morning feeling powerful. The sun filtered through the bedroom curtains of his executive home, warming his face as he stretched in Egyptian cotton sheets. His head throbbed from the bourbon he'd consumed after teaching his wife her place last night, but the pain felt earned somehow. Righteous. The smell hit him halfway down the stairs. Fresh pancakes, bacon crackling, the rich aroma of the expensive coffee beans he preferred, the ones that cost $40 a bag. His stomach growled appreciatively. He smiled. She'd finally understood. A firm hand was all women needed sometimes. His father had taught him that, and his father had been right. Joel descended the marble staircase in his silk robe, the one Danya had given him last Christmas. Everything in this house bore her fingerprints if he'd bothered to notice. The artwork on the walls, the furniture that somehow always perfectly suited his taste, the cars in the garage. But Joel had stopped noticing Danya's contributions long ago. In his mind, he'd built this empire himself through his brilliance, his hustle, his vision. The dining room table was set beautifully, white linen, fresh flowers, crystal glasses catching the morning light, pancakes stacked high with butter melting down the sides, crispy bacon arranged just how he liked it, scrambled eggs with chives, fresh orange juice in a pitcher, cinnamon rolls still warm from the oven. His mouth watered. "Good," he called out, assuming Danya was in the kitchen. "You finally understood your place." He rounded the corner toward his chair at the head of the table, already reaching for the coffee pot. Then he froze. Sitting at the table wasn't Danya serving him breakfast. Two people occupied the chairs where he and his wife usually sat. The man was late 40s with a silver beard, trimmed immaculately, wearing an expensive watch that caught the light. He was calmly eating a pancake, knife and fork moving with precise, unhurried movements. Next to him sat a woman with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun, a leather folder open before her. Both looked up at Joel with expressions that made his blood run cold. Not anger, not disgust. Just professional assessment, like scientists observing a specimen. "Mr. Pace," the man said, his accent carrying the refined cadence of someone educated at expensive schools. "Please, sit down. These pancakes are exceptional. Your wife is a remarkable cook." Joel's hands clenched. "Who the hell are you? What are you doing in my house?" "Your house?" The man set down his fork with deliberate care. "Actually, that's one of several misconceptions we need to address this morning." He gestured to the empty chair. "Sit. You'll want to be seated for this conversation. I don't take orders in my own home. Get out before I call the police." "The police would be an interesting choice." The woman spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to courtrooms. "Given that you committed felony assault last night, we have photographs, hospital documentation, witness statements from your neighbors who heard the altercation." Joel's face drained of color. He looked around wildly for Danya. That's when he saw her. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured lawn, backlit by morning sun. She wore a white suit that fit her like armor, tailored so perfectly it must have cost thousands. The fabric was crisp, immaculate, catching the light as she breathed. Her natural hair, which he'd pressured her to straighten for years, was styled in an elegant updo that showcased the graceful line of her neck. She looked like a queen presiding over an execution. She looked like someone he'd never met. "Dania!" His voice cracked. "What is this?" She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge him, just kept staring out the window as if he'd already ceased to exist. The man at the table slid a folder across the polished surface. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Felix Okafor. I've managed investment portfolios for high-net-worth individuals for 20 years. Dania Dawson became my client when she was 25 years old, after she sold her second technology startup. Since then, I've helped her build and maintain a portfolio currently valued at $340 million. The numbers didn't make sense. Joel stared at the folder without opening it. "That's impossible. Dania doesn't work. She's never worked. She's just my wife." "Just your wife." Felix's voice carried something dangerous now, like a blade sliding from a sheath. "Let's discuss what just your wife has actually been doing." He opened another folder. "Pace Digital Solutions, your company, founded 3 years ago with a mysterious $2 million investment from Summit Capital Group. Except Summit Capital Group doesn't exist, Mr. Pace. It's a shell company Dania created to fund your venture without you knowing." Joel's legs felt weak. He sank into the chair. "Your breakthrough client, Meridian Technologies, who gave you the contract that made your company profitable?" Felix continued, sliding papers across the table. "Dania's college roommate runs it. She called in a personal favor. This office building you work in downtown, Dania owns it. She bought it 2 years ago and leases it back to you at below market rates. Your car, your country club membership, your investment accounts." Paper after paper hit the table. She co-signed everything, quietly arranged everything, funded everything. "You're lying." Joel's voice sounded hollow, even to himself. "I never lie, Mr. Pace. I deal in documentation." Felix tapped the folders. "Every transaction is here. Every bank transfer, every contract, every favor called in. For 5 years, you've been living a life entirely constructed and subsidized by the woman you beat unconscious last night." "I didn't." "She's not unconscious. She's standing right there." "She was unconscious for 4 minutes," the woman said coldly. "I'm Lydia Keating, by the way. I'll be representing Mrs. Dawson in the divorce proceedings. The hospital documented a concussion, fractured cheekbone, split lip requiring 6 stitches, and severe bruising across her ribs and arms. The police photographs are time-stamped from 2 a.m. when your neighbor, Mrs. Chen, called them after hearing screams." Joel looked at Dania again. She still hadn't turned around. The white suit gleamed in the sunlight like a flag of surrender, except she wasn't surrendering. She was declaring war. "Dania, baby, look at me. Let me explain. I was drunk. You know I didn't mean it. You embarrassed me at that gala, talking to that man like I didn't exist." "Stop talking." Her voice cut across the room like a knife. She finally turned to face him, and Joel's breath caught. Her face bore the evidence of his fists. Purple bruises bloomed across her cheekbone. Her lip was swollen despite the stitches, but her eyes held something worse than pain. They held nothing. No love, no hope, no recognition. "You wanted a wife who knew her place, Joel." She walked toward the table with measured steps, each footfall deliberate. "You're about to learn I was never below you. You were always beneath me. I built this company. I made the deals. I worked 16-hour days. With my money." She was close now, close enough that he could see the tiny scar on her lip from last night. "With my connections. With my strategic advice you thought was just pillow talk. Every major decision you made, I guided. Every breakthrough, I orchestrated. Every success, I bought and paid for. That's not true." "It's all true." Felix stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "And now we're taking it all back. Every asset with her name attached. Every contract that exists because of her connections, every dollar she invested. The divorce papers include a complete forensic accounting. You'll see exactly how much of your life was actually yours. Joel looked around wildly, trying to find some foothold in this collapsing reality. You can't do this. I'll fight you. I have lawyers. Your lawyers have already declined to represent you, Lydia said, closing her folder with a soft snap. Once they saw our documentation, they realized this case is indefensible. You'll find that most reputable firms in this city won't touch you. Mrs. Dawson has been very thorough. I'll tell everyone you're lying. I'll expose you. Please do. Felix smiled for the first time, and it was terrifying. Please contact the media. Please tell everyone that your wife is secretly a multimillionaire who's been funding your entire life. The press will have a field day discovering that you beat one of the most successful black women entrepreneurs in America and thought you'd get away with it. Joel looked at Danya, really looked at her and saw a stranger. Who are you? I'm the woman who found you broken on Crimson Peak 7 years ago, she said quietly. I'm the woman who fell in love with your dreams when you had nothing. I'm the woman who believed you were good, who saw potential in you, who built an empire and handed it to you wrapped in a bow because I loved you. She paused. I'm also the woman you destroyed, but she doesn't exist anymore. The white suit caught the light again as she turned to leave. She looked back once, and Joel saw finality in that glance. That suit you're wearing, I bought it. The pancakes you smelled, I made them, but they were never for you. Nothing ever will be again. The three of them walked out together, leaving Joel alone at a table set for a feast he'd never tasted. Through the window he watched them get into a black car and drive away. The folders remained on the table, evidence of a life that had never really been his. Joel sat in the silence of his house, surrounded by furniture his wife had chosen, eating pancakes his wife had made for his executioners, and finally understood what it meant to have nothing. The coffee went cold in his cup. The morning sun climbed higher, and Joel Pace, who'd thought himself powerful just an hour ago, discovered that he'd been a puppet dancing on strings he'd never seen. Chapter 2. The Woman Who Painted Sunsets. 7 years ago, Joel Pace stood on Crimson Peak and seriously considered whether his life was worth continuing. The mountain overlook stretched before him like the edge of the world. Below, the valley spread out in patches of green and gold, farmhouses scattered like dice across the landscape. Above, the late afternoon sky blazed with the kind of colors that hurt to look at. Deep oranges bleeding into violent purples, clouds lit from beneath like they were on fire. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Joel was 28 years old and had nothing. His tech startup, which he'd poured 3 years and every dollar he could borrow into, had collapsed 6 weeks ago. His co-founder had stolen the code and the clients, leaving Joel with nothing but debt and a shattered reputation. His apartment was gone, repossessed. His girlfriend had left when the money dried up. His parents had stopped answering his calls after he'd borrowed too much and repaid too little. He'd driven up here in his dying Honda because he remembered reading somewhere that Crimson Peak had the best sunset views in the state. He figured if he was going to think about ending things, he should at least do it somewhere beautiful. The wind whipped across the overlook, carrying the scent of pine and wild sage. Joel stood at the low stone wall marking the cliff edge, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, and wondered if this was really it. If this was how his story ended. Not with success or redemption, just with failure and gravity. Then he heard humming. The voice was clear and unself-conscious, carrying an old jazz melody he half recognized. Joel turned, startled, and stopped breathing. About 30 feet away, a woman stood at an easel, completely absorbed in her work. She was covered in paint, streaks of orange across her forearms, a smudge of purple on her jaw, spatters of gold across her old jeans. She wore a paint-stained tank top and no shoes, her feet bare on the rocky ground like she'd grown there. Her hair fell in natural coils around her face, catching the dying light. But it was her painting that made Joel forget about the cliff behind him. The canvas was massive, strapped to a professional easel, and she attacked it with fierce, confident strokes. Her work wasn't delicate or pretty. It was raw, alive, almost violent in its intensity. She painted like she was arguing with the sky, challenging it to be more beautiful, more honest. Joel must have made some sound because she looked up, brush still poised mid-stroke. Her eyes met his and she smiled. "If you jump, you'll ruin my composition. I finally got the light right." The absurdity of the statement startled a laugh out of him. "Sorry to inconvenience you." "I'm serious." She set down her brush and wiped her hands on her jeans, which only added more colors to the rainbow already there. "I've been trying to capture this exact angle for 3 weeks. If there's suddenly a body in my foreground, the whole piece is compromised." She tilted her head, studying him with the same intensity she'd given the canvas. "You look like you're standing very close to an edge, though, and I don't just mean the physical one." "That obvious?" "I'm good at reading light and shadow. People aren't so different from landscapes. Both carry their weather right on the surface if you know how to look." Joel should have felt defensive, exposed. Instead, he felt oddly relieved that someone had noticed, that someone had seen past the careful mask of being fine to the truth underneath. "Bad month," he said finally. "Bad enough to drive to Crimson Peak alone." She walked closer, bare feet somehow finding purchase on ground that looked impossible to navigate. "Want to talk about it? Or should I go back to ignoring you and preserving your tragic solitude?" Another unexpected laugh escaped him. "You're very direct. Life's too short for the alternative." She gestured to a flat rock near her easel. "I have ginger tea in my thermos and homemade bread in my pack. You look like you could use both. I'm Dania, by the way, Dania Dawson." "Joel Pace." She settled onto her rock and patted the space beside it. Joel found himself moving toward her, drawn by something he couldn't name. She poured tea into a dented metal cup and produced a cloth-wrapped bundle of bread that still felt warm. The tea was spicy and sweet, the bread dense and perfect. "So," Dania said, tearing off a piece of bread for herself, "tell me about your bad month." And Joel did. Sitting on that rock as the sun painted impossible colors across the sky, he told this strange barefoot painter everything. The startup that failed, the partner who betrayed him, the money gone, the girlfriend who left, the crushing weight of knowing he'd gambled everything and lost. Dania listened without interrupting, without offering empty platitudes. She just listened the way most people didn't anymore, like his story actually mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, watching the light shift across the valley. "Good," she said finally. "Good. You needed to fail. Now you know what doesn't work. Most people never get that education. They play it safe their whole lives and wonder why nothing great ever happens to them." She turned to look at him directly. "You took a big swing and missed. That's not tragedy, Joel. That's learning. The question is what you do with the lesson." "I don't have anything left to try with. You have you." She said it so simply, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. Everything else is just resources. Those come and go. But the person who had the vision to build something in the first place? That person is still here. I don't feel like that person anymore. That's because you're in the middle of your story. The middle always feels like the end. But stories don't stop in the middle, Joel. They keep going. The hero learns something, gets back up, tries again differently. The sun was touching the horizon now, turning the whole sky into liquid fire. Dania stood abruptly and grabbed his hand. "Close your eyes." "What?" "Just do it. Trust me." Joel closed his eyes. Her hand was warm in his, calloused from paintbrushes, strong. "Now listen. Really listen." At first, Joel heard nothing but wind. Then, slowly, other sounds emerged. Birds calling their last songs before nightfall. The rustle of something small moving through the scrub brush. The distant murmur of the valley below. His own heartbeat. His own breath. "This is what success actually is," Dania said softly. "This moment, standing on a mountain, alive, feeling the wind, hearing the world. Everything else, money, status, other people's approval, that's just noise. Don't forget that." Joel opened his eyes. Dania had released his hand and was back at her easel, adding stars to her painting in silver. She worked quickly now, the light fading fast. He watched her paint, mesmerized by her certainty, her joy in the work itself. When she finished, full darkness had fallen. She studied the canvas for a long moment, then began unhooking it from the easel. Here, she held it out to him. For when you forget what matters. I can't take your painting. You spent hours on it. I'll make more. That's the beautiful thing about art. There's always another sunset, another canvas, another chance. She pressed it into his hands. The paint was still tacky in places, but the piece was stunning. The sunset she'd captured was both realistic and transcendent, somehow holding all the emotion of the moment they'd just shared. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Just remember that someone saw you today, Joel Pace. Someone saw you standing at an edge, and instead of pushing or pulling, I just reminded you that you could choose to step back. That choice is always yours. She packed up her supplies with practiced efficiency, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Joel watched her, trying to memorize this moment. This strange angel who'd appeared when he needed saving. How do I find you again? He called out as she started down the trail. She turned back, and even in the darkness, he could see her smile. If you're supposed to find me, you will. Then she was gone, swallowed by shadows and trees, leaving Joel alone on Crimson Peak with a painting and the strange, unfamiliar feeling of hope stirring in his chest. He looked at the canvas in his hands, then out at the valley where lights were beginning to appear in windows. Families, lives, stories continuing even when they felt finished. He thought about Dania's words, about being in the middle of his story, about learning from failure instead of being destroyed by it. Joel Pace stepped away from the edge and walked back to his car. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that Dania Dawson had driven to Crimson Peak that day from a meeting in the city. She'd just sold her third technology startup for $89 million. She'd worn a designer suit to the signing, shaken hands with investors and lawyers, posed for photos. Then she'd changed into old clothes in her car, grabbed her art supplies, and driven to the mountain. Because for Dania, success had never been about the money. It was about moments like the one she'd just shared with a stranger, the raw, honest human connection that made everything else worthwhile. She drove down the winding mountain road with paint still wet on her hands, humming the same jazz melody, and wondered if she'd see Joel Pace again. Something in her chest whispered that she would. Chapter 3. The Coffee Shop Conspiracy. 3 weeks later, Joel Pace walked into Rosie's all-night diner at 6 in the morning and nearly dropped his coffee. She sat in a corner booth, bent over a journal, writing furiously with a cheap ballpoint pen. She wore a simple grey hoodie and glasses he hadn't seen before, her hair pulled back in a casual bun. She looked nothing like the fierce painter from Crimson Peak, and yet Joel would have recognized her anywhere. His heart hammered against his ribs. He'd thought about her every single day since that sunset. He'd hung her painting in his tiny rented room, studying it each morning, drawing strength from the memory of her words. But he'd had no way to find her, no last name, nothing but her first name and the lingering warmth of her belief in him. Now here she was, real and solid and impossibly present in a 24-hour diner that served terrible coffee and excellent pie. Joel's feet moved before his brain caught up. He walked to her table, and when his shadow fell across her journal, she looked up. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by something that looked like joy. "The man from the mountain," she said, and her smile could have lit the whole diner. "Joel Pace, you stepped back from the edge." "I did." He gestured to the empty side of the booth. "Can I join you?" "I was hoping you would." He slid in across from her, and suddenly the terrible coffee and worn vinyl seats felt like the most important place in the world. This was fate, coincidence, cosmic intervention. Whatever you wanted to call it, it had handed him a second chance. "What are you doing here at 6 a.m.? he asked. "I could ask you the same thing." She closed her journal and set down her pen. I like early mornings. The world feels full of possibility before most people wake up and start weighing it down with their expectations. I work the night shift at a warehouse across the street. Just got off. Joel had pieced together 3 jobs after the startup collapsed. Security guard at night, restaurant lunch shift, freelance coding in whatever hours remained. He was exhausted all the time, running on caffeine and stubborn determination. But he was working on a new idea, something better, smarter than before. Danya's words had haunted him in the best possible way. Learn from the failure. Try again, differently. A warehouse. She studied him with those sharp, seeing eyes. But you're building something else, I can tell. You have that look. What look? Like you're only partially here. Like part of your brain is always somewhere else, working on problems the rest of us can't see. She was right. Joel found himself telling her about his new idea, a project management software that approached team collaboration from a completely different angle. He'd learned from his first failure. This time, he was starting smaller, building a prototype before seeking funding, validating the concept with real users. Danya listened with complete focus, asking questions that weren't just polite, but actually insightful. She challenged his assumptions, pointed out potential problems, suggested solutions he hadn't considered. The conversation flowed so naturally that Joel didn't notice 2 hours had passed until the diner started filling with the breakfast crowd. I should let you go, Danya said, though she didn't move to leave. Or we could exchange numbers this time, Joel said, so I don't have to hope the universe randomly places us in the same location again. She laughed and pulled out her phone. They traded contact information, and Joel felt like he'd won something precious. Over the next few months, they fell into a pattern. They met at strange hours in strange places, midnight diners after his security shift, dawn hikes before her workday began, 3 a.m. food trucks, all-night bookstores. Danya never seemed to keep normal hours, and Joel appreciated that she adapted to his chaotic schedule without complaint. She never talked much about her own work. When Joel asked, she'd say she did consulting or freelance projects and change the subject. He saw her working on her laptop sometimes in coffee shops, spreadsheets and documents he didn't quite understand. He assumed she was struggling like him, piecing together income from various sources, making it work. He had no idea she was managing a 9-figure investment portfolio from that laptop, conducting video conferences with Silicon Valley executives from the back corner of diners, reviewing acquisition offers while sharing his French fries. Danya had made a conscious choice the moment she'd met Joel on that mountain. She would let him see her as she actually was, the painter, the dreamer, the woman who valued moments over money without the distraction of her wealth. She wanted to know if he'd love her for herself, not for what she could provide. So she dressed simply, drove a modest car, met him in cheap restaurants. She was present with him in a way she'd never been with anyone else. She listened to his dreams, shared her thoughts on art and meaning, and what made a life worthwhile. She challenged him intellectually, supported him emotionally, and slowly, inevitably, fell in love with the man he was becoming. Their first kiss happened on their 8th unofficial date, 2 months after the diner reunion. Joel had gotten an email confirming his first beta client for his new software. It was a tiny company, barely paying anything, but it was validation, proof that his idea worked. He called Danya immediately, and she met him at their spot, a small park near the warehouse where they'd watched the sunrise together several times. She brought champagne in plastic cups, laughing at her own prepared spontaneity. To your first client, she toasted, plastic cup raised, the first of thousands. You really believe that? Joel, I've watched you rebuild yourself from nothing over these past months. I've seen how you think, how you work, how you learn from every mistake. If I were a betting woman, which I am, I'd put everything on you. Something in the way she said it with absolute conviction made Joel's heart feel too big for his chest. He set down his cup and kissed her. She tasted like cheap champagne and possibility. When they pulled apart, she was smiling against his lips. I was wondering when you'd do that. I was terrified you'd say no. Joel, I've been waiting for you to kiss me since the moment you stepped back from that cliff edge. I've been in love with your courage since that first sunset." They spent that night talking until dawn broke pink and gold across the sky. They talked about everything: childhood dreams, past relationships, fears about the future, hopes for what they might build together. Danya told him about growing up with a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs, about learning early that money was just a tool, not a measure of worth. She told him about her passion for art, her belief that the most important thing anyone could do was create something meaningful. She didn't tell him about the millions in her accounts. She didn't mention the startups she'd built and sold. She didn't explain that the consulting work she did was actually advising venture capital firms on which technologies would reshape industries. She just loved him, purely, completely, without the weight of expectation that had crushed every other relationship she'd attempted. Their courtship continued through spring and into summer. Joel's software gained more clients. He quit the warehouse and restaurant jobs, working full-time on his company now, still poor, but no longer desperate. Danya was there for every milestone, every setback, every breakthrough. She offered suggestions so casually, Joel thought they were just conversation, not realizing he was receiving strategic advice worth thousands of dollars an hour. One Saturday morning, Joel brought her to meet his mother. They drove 3 hours to the small town where he'd grown up, where his mother still lived in the same modest house. Joel was nervous. His mother had harsh opinions about his previous girlfriend, the one who'd left when the money disappeared. But his mother took one look at Danya and pulled her into a hug. "You're the one," she said simply. "I can always tell. You see my son, not just what he might become." Danya helped cook dinner, laughed at his mother's embarrassing childhood stories, washed dishes without being asked. She fit into his life so perfectly, it felt like she'd always been there. On the drive home, Joel reached for her hand across the console. "I love you," he said. "I know it's fast, but I love you. You make me believe in versions of myself I'd given up on." "I love you too," she said softly. "You make me remember why any of this matters." That night, they broke into an abandoned observatory on the outskirts of the city. Danya had a key. She said she knew someone who used to work there. They climbed the rusty stairs to the observation deck, where the dome had partially collapsed, leaving gaps that framed the stars. They lay on the dusty floor, side by side, staring up through the broken dome at the vast sweep of the Milky Way. Danya told him stories about the constellations, made up mythology about star-crossed lovers and cosmic adventures. Joel told her about the future he saw for his company, for their life together. "You're going to make it," she said, turning on her side to face him. "You're going to build something extraordinary. I can feel it." "We're going to build something extraordinary," he corrected. "I don't want to do any of this without you." She kissed him then, deep and slow, and Joel felt like the universe had aligned just for this moment. Like every failure, every humiliation, every dark night had been leading him to this dusty observatory floor with this remarkable woman in his arms. "Marry me," he said against her lips. She pulled back, eyes wide. "What?" "I know it's crazy. I know I don't have much to offer you yet, but I can't imagine any future that doesn't have you in it. Marry me, Danya. Let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." Tears slipped down her cheeks, catching starlight. "Joel, you're already worthy. You've always been worthy, and yes, 1,000 times yes." He didn't have a ring. He had nothing but the promise of a future he was still building. But she said yes anyway, like it was the easiest answer in the world. They spent that night in the observatory, planning a life together, a small wedding, just family and close friends, an apartment they'd share, combining their modest resources, building his company together, creating art together, making a life that mattered beyond bank accounts and status symbols. Joel felt like the luckiest man alive. What he didn't know was that Danya had removed her $40,000 watch before meeting him that day, like she always did. That the someone who'd given her a key to the observatory was the city councilman she'd advised on tech infrastructure, who owed her a dozen favors. That she'd been offered a position on 3 corporate boards that week alone, opportunities worth millions, and she'd turned them all down because they'd take time away from building this life with Joel. She lay in his arms under broken stars and made a vow to herself she would give him everything, her heart, her mind, her strategic brilliance, but she would do it quietly, invisibly. She would be the foundation he built on without ever knowing she was there. She would love him enough to let him believe he'd done it all himself, because that's what Joel needed to heal from his failure. He needed to rebuild his confidence, to prove to himself that he could succeed. If he knew about her money, her success, her power, it would poison everything. He'd always wonder if he'd earned his achievements or if she'd bought them for him. So Danya Dawson, worth nearly $100 million, chose to be just Danya, the woman who loved Joel Pace with everything she had, asking nothing in return but his heart. It was the greatest gift she'd ever given anyone. It was also the decision that would eventually break her. Chapter 4. The year love was enough. They married on a Tuesday morning in September at the courthouse downtown, with Joel's mother and Danya's closest friend as witnesses. Danya wore a simple white dress she'd bought off the rack. Joel wore the only suit he owned, cleaned and pressed until it looked almost new. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to build a life based on honesty, partnership, and love that went deeper than circumstances. The judge smiled as he pronounced them married, and Joel kissed his wife like she was the only real thing in the world. Their wedding reception was pizza and champagne in Joel's tiny apartment, which would now be their apartment. Danya had quietly broken the lease on her own place across town, the penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and designer furniture. She'd put everything in storage and moved into Joel's space with nothing but 2 suitcases and her painting supplies. Joel apologized for how small it was, how the kitchen barely fit one person, how the bedroom window overlooked an alley. Danya kissed him quiet. "This is perfect. We're perfect." And for that first year, they were. Danya worked from their cramped kitchen table, laptop open, managing what Joel thought was freelance consulting work. In reality, she was orchestrating his success with the precision of a master strategist. She'd created Summit Capital Group, a shell company that appeared to be a typical venture capital firm. Through it, she invested $2 million in Pace Digital Solutions, structured to look like a competitive funding round Joel had won on merit. Joel was ecstatic. He'd pitched to dozens of investors, refined his presentation based on Danya's casual suggestions, and finally, someone had recognized his vision. He came home with champagne and Chinese takeout, spinning Danya around their tiny living room. "We did it! They believed in us!" "They believed in you," she corrected, her heart aching with the lie. "Your pitch was brilliant." She'd also made a phone call to her former college roommate, who now ran Meridian Technologies. One lunch meeting, a few careful suggestions about how Joel's software could solve problems Meridian didn't even know they had, and suddenly Pace Digital Solutions had its breakthrough client. The contract was worth enough to hire a small team, rent office space, build real momentum. Joel worked 18-hour days, fueled by possibility and Danya's unwavering belief. He'd come home exhausted, collapsing on their second-hand couch, and she'd bring him dinner, rub his shoulders, listen to his ideas. She'd ask questions that pushed his thinking, offer perspectives that opened new directions. "What if you approached the interface from the user's emotional journey instead of their logical workflow?" she'd say, and Joel would light up, already seeing the solution. He thought she was just naturally insightful. He didn't realize she was applying years of experience building user-centered technology, knowledge earned from founding 3 successful startups. Their happiest moments came in the spaces between work. Saturday mornings they'd wake up slow, tangled together in their cheap sheets. Danya would make coffee while Joel made pancakes, and they'd eat breakfast sitting on the fire escape, watching their neighborhood come to life. They played terrible music too loud and danced in their tiny living room. They painted together. Joel was awful at it, all thumbs and clumsy brush strokes, but Dania taught him with patience and laughter. Sunday evenings Joel would read to her while she sketched. He'd work through classic novels or poetry, and she'd draw his hands, his profile, the way light fell across their shared space. Those drawings accumulated on their walls, a gallery of their life together. They had inside jokes nobody else understood, a whole language of glances and touches. The way Joel would find little notes Dania left in his work bag. "You're going to do something amazing today." The way Dania would come home to flowers Joel had bought from the corner vendor, cheap blooms that wilted fast, but meant everything. Money was tight, but they didn't care. They shopped at thrift stores, cooked at home, found free entertainment in parks and museums. They were building something together, and that felt infinitely more valuable than comfort. But cracks appeared slowly, so slowly Dania almost didn't notice them forming. Joel's company grew, the team expanded, revenue increased. With success came opportunities that required different versions of Joel. Business dinners with potential clients, networking events at expensive hotels, conference presentations where first impressions mattered. Joel started paying attention to how other successful CEOs dressed, talked, lived. He noticed their watches, their cars, their perfectly styled wives. He started comparing, and in comparison, he started finding his life lacking. "We should move," he said one morning. "Somewhere nicer. This apartment isn't appropriate for client meetings." "We can meet clients at your office," Dania suggested. "It's not just that. I want to give you better. You deserve better." But better came with a price Dania hadn't anticipated. The new apartment was in a luxury building downtown. Joel put the deposit down without consulting her, proud of himself for being able to afford it. Dania quietly bought the unit through another shell company and structured it as a long-term lease with owner financing, making the payments manageable for Joel's growing but still modest salary. He thought he was providing for her. She was actually subsidizing his ego. The new apartment was beautiful, hardwood floors, granite countertops, a view of the city skyline. But it felt cold to Dania. There was no fire escape to eat breakfast on, no creaky floorboards that announced their movements, no sense of them building something from nothing together. Joel bought new furniture on credit, expensive suits, a luxury car he couldn't quite afford but convinced himself he needed for image. Each purchase came with a subtle shift in how he saw himself and how he saw Dania. "You should wear your hair straight more often," he mentioned casually one morning. "It looks more professional." Dania looked up from her coffee, stomach tightening. "Professional for what? I work from home." "For events, when you come to company functions. First impressions matter." She wanted to argue, wanted to remind him that he'd loved her natural hair, had run his fingers through her coils on their wedding night and called her beautiful. But she saw the stress in his eyes, the pressure he was under to perform, to succeed, to prove himself. She told herself it was temporary, that once he felt more secure, he'd remember what actually mattered. So she straightened her hair. She wore the dresses he bought for her, the ones that fit his image of what a CEO's wife should look like. She smiled at his business partners and said little, playing the supportive spouse. Each small concession felt like losing a piece of herself. Their first anniversary arrived on a Tuesday, just like their wedding. Joel was closing a major deal and couldn't take the day off. He texted an apology and promised to make it up to her over the weekend. Dania sat alone in their expensive apartment and cried. Not because he'd missed the day, she understood business pressures. She cried because she looked around their new space and couldn't find them anywhere. The couple who'd eaten pizza on the floor and danced to bad music had been replaced by strangers chasing an image of success that felt hollow. She called Felix that afternoon, voice shaking. "He's changing. Or maybe I'm just finally seeing who he really is." "Come back," Felix said immediately. "You don't have to do this. You've built enough for him. Let him stand on his own now." "I can't. I love him. He just needs time to adjust. Once the company is stable, once he feels secure, he'll remember what we had." Danya. Felix's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen this pattern before. People don't usually go back. They only go forward toward who they're becoming. Give him more time, please. I need to believe we can find our way back. That weekend, Joel took her to an expensive restaurant as promised. He gave her a designer purse, proud of himself for being able to afford luxury gifts now. Danya thanked him, wore it once, then tucked it in the back of her closet. Later, alone in the bathroom, she looked at herself in the mirror, hair straightened, expensive dress, designer purse sitting on the counter, and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She pulled out her phone and looked at old photos from that first year. There she was with paint in her hair, laughing on their fire escape. There was Joel, flour on his nose from their breakfast disasters. There they were, broken, happy, and completely themselves. Danya saved those photos to a separate album she titled Remember, because she needed to remember that the man she'd married was still in there somewhere. She just had to be patient enough, loving enough, to call him back. But patience and love weren't always enough. And Joel Pace was walking further away from Crimson Peak with every success, forgetting the lessons he'd learned on that mountain edge, forgetting the woman who'd saved him there. Chapter 5. The Man Who Forgot Mountains. By their third year of marriage, Joel Pace had transformed into someone Danya barely recognized. His company had grown exponentially. Pace Digital Solutions employed 50 people now, occupied an entire floor in a downtown tech hub, and was being courted for acquisition by major players. Joel's face appeared in business magazines. He spoke at conferences. Other entrepreneurs asked him for advice, and he gave it freely, confident in his expertise. The money poured in. Joel upgraded everything. The car became cars, plural. The apartment became a house in the suburbs with a home theater and wine cellar. His wardrobe filled with designer labels. He hired a personal assistant, joined an exclusive country club, and started collecting expensive watches. Danya watched it all happen from the margins of his life. She'd hoped that security would make him softer, kinder, would remind him of the man he'd been on Crimson Peak. Instead, success seemed to harden something in Joel, like he was constantly defending territory he'd won. He became obsessed with image, with status markers, with ensuring everyone knew he'd made it, and Danya became part of that image, a prop to display rather than a partner to treasure. "We're attending the Tech Innovation Gala next month," Joel announced one evening, not asking, telling. "I need you to look the part. I've arranged for a stylist." Danya looked up from her book. A stylist. Someone who can help you present better. These events matter. The right dress, the right hair, the right everything. People judge me based on you. The words landed like a slap. "Since when do you care what people think?" "Since I have a reputation to protect. Since I'm not broke and desperate anymore. Things are different now, Danya. We're different now." "You're different," she said quietly. "I'm still the same person you married. Maybe that's the problem." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Joel sighed and softened his voice, like he was being reasonable with someone unreasonable. "Look, I'm not trying to change you. I'm trying to help you grow with me. Is that so wrong? I want to give you everything. Designer clothes, jewelry, the best of everything. Why can't you just accept that?" "Because I don't need any of it," Danya wanted to scream. "Because I bought you all of this. Because I miss the man who thought pizza on the floor was perfect. Because you're killing us with your ambition and can't even see it." Instead, she said, "Okay, I'll meet with the stylist." So Danya let them change her. She sat through hair appointments, wore the designer gowns, learned to smile in photographs without letting her true feelings show. She attended Joel's events on his arm, beautiful and silent, the perfect accessory to his success. But inside, she felt herself disappearing. Felix called her weakly, increasingly worried. "You've done enough, Danya. You've built his entire empire. Let him have it and walk away." "I can't. He's my husband. I took vows." "Vows he's already broken. He doesn't see you anymore. He sees a prop. He's just stressed. The company is at a critical phase. Once things stabilize, it's been 3 years. Things are stable. He's just become someone else. Danya knew Felix was right, but admitting it meant admitting she'd failed, that her love hadn't been enough, that the man she'd fallen for on Crimson Peak was gone for good. She wasn't ready for that truth. The breaking point came at a charity gala one Friday evening. Danya stood near the bar, nursing a glass of wine she didn't want, watching Joel work the room. He moved with such confidence now, shaking hands, making connections, closing deals even at social events. His laugh carried across the space, too loud, too performed. Danya Dawson? She turned to find a man in his 50s, distinguished, with kind eyes behind expensive glasses. He looked familiar. "I'm Thomas Reeves. We met at the Tech Summit about 8 years ago. You were pitching your second startup, the data analytics platform. Brilliant presentation." Memory clicked into place. Thomas Reeves ran one of the largest venture capital firms in the country. He'd been one of the investors interested in acquiring her company before she'd sold it to a different group. "Mr. Reeves, yes, of course. How are you?" "The question is, how are you? I haven't seen your name attached to anything new in years. Last I heard, you'd sold your third company, and then just vanished. We all thought you'd retired to some tropical island. I got married, decided to step back from the spotlight." "Married? To whom? Anyone I'd know?" Before Danya could answer, Joel appeared at her elbow, sliding his arm around her waist possessively. She felt him tense when he saw who she was talking to. Thomas Reeves was tech royalty, someone Joel had been trying to get a meeting with for months. "Thomas Reeves," Joel said, too eager, too loud. "Joel Pace, Pace Digital Solutions. I've been hoping to connect with you about potential partnership opportunities." Thomas shook Joel's hand politely, but his attention stayed on Danya. "Your wife was just telling me you're married. What a small world. So you must be aware of your wife's impressive background then. The 3 successful exits, the innovations in user experience design, her work on—" "Oh, Danya did some administrative work at tech companies before we met," Joel interrupted, his grip on her waist tightening. "Nothing major. Now she focuses on supporting my career, which keeps her busy enough." Danya's breath caught. The casual dismissal of everything she'd built, achieved, created, distilled down to some administrative work in front of someone who knew exactly what she'd accomplished. Thomas's expression shifted, confusion giving way to understanding, and then something that looked like pity as he looked at Danya. "I see," he said carefully. "Well, it was wonderful seeing you again, Danya. I hope you're happy." He walked away, and Danya felt the last piece of herself that had been holding on just let go. "You embarrassed me," Joel hissed in her ear, steering her toward a quiet corner. "Talking to Thomas Reeves like you're somebody important, like you have something to contribute beyond being my wife." I was being polite. He approached me. "You were trying to make me look small, showing off, making me seem like I'm not enough." "Joel, that's not—" "I'm the one who built Pace Digital Solutions. Me. I work 18-hour days. I close the deals. I make the decisions. You get to live in luxury because of what I've created, and the least you could do is show some gratitude instead of flirting with investors at events." "Flirting? Joel, we were having a professional conversation." "Professional? You don't have a profession. You're my wife. That's your job, and tonight you failed at it." Each word felt like a fist. Danya looked at her husband, at his angry eyes, his clenched jaw, his complete inability to see her as anything more than an extension of himself, and felt something crack open inside her chest. This was who he'd become. This was what her love and sacrifice had created. A man so inflated by success he'd built on her money that he couldn't see her standing right in front of him. They drove home in silence. Joel's anger filled the car like smoke, suffocating. When they got to their house, the house she'd actually purchased through another shell company, though Joel thought he'd bought it, he poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and downed it in one swallow. I'm going to bed, Danya said quietly. Good. Maybe you'll wake up remembering your place. She climbed the stairs to their bedroom, her hands shaking. She looked at her phone, pulled up Felix's contact, her finger hovering over the call button. But what would she say? That she'd finally admitted the truth. That 3 years of hoping for change had been wasted. That the man she'd loved on that mountain no longer existed. Instead, she texted him, "Set up the extraction plan. But slowly. I need to give him every chance to come back to me." Felix's response was immediate. "Already done. Everything's ready whenever you are." Danya sat on the edge of their bed, the bed she'd picked out, paid for, made comfortable for a man who no longer saw her, and began planning her exit from a marriage that had died months ago. She just hadn't been willing to admit it until now. The next morning, Joel acted like nothing had happened. He kissed her forehead before leaving for work, reminded her about a dinner party they were hosting next week, told her he'd need her to look nice for the potential investors attending. Danya smiled and nodded and said all the right things. And quietly, invisibly, she began documenting everything, every investment she'd made in his name, every connection she'd arranged, every contract that existed because of her background network. She photographed documents, saved emails, built a file that would demonstrate exactly how much of Joel's empire was actually hers. Not because she wanted to destroy him, because she needed proof that she'd existed, that she'd mattered, that her love had been real and powerful and world-changing, even if Joel couldn't see it. That night, alone in their guest bedroom where she'd started sleeping more often, Danya pulled out a canvas and her paints for the first time in months. She painted Crimson Peak at sunset, but this time the sky was dark, stormy, beautiful in its violence. She painted the cliff edge where they'd met, but now it was empty. No figure standing there, no woman saving a lost man. Just the edge itself, sharp and unforgiving and final. She titled it Goodbye and signed it with her maiden name because Danya Dawson was coming back and Mrs. Joel Pace was starting to disappear. Chapter 6. The Woman Who Planned Freedom. 2 years before the morning with the white suit and pancakes, Danya Dawson began building the architecture of her escape. She did it quietly, methodically, like she did everything that mattered. During the day, she played the role Joel expected. The polished wife who planned his dinner parties, who smiled for photographs, who stayed silent at business functions. At night, after Joel fell asleep or passed out drunk, she sat in the guest bedroom with her laptop and documented the infrastructure of his life. Every shell company she'd created to fund his business, every contact she'd leveraged to win him contracts, every property she owned that he believed was his. Every financial thread she'd woven into the tapestry of his success. The numbers were staggering even to her. She'd invested over $15 million in Joel's company and lifestyle over 5 years, all carefully hidden through legitimate-looking investment vehicles. She'd called in favors worth millions more, introductions, contracts, strategic advice provided through back channels. Felix helped her create a master file, a complete forensic accounting that would unravel Joel's entire empire if needed. "Why are we doing this?" Felix asked during one of their encrypted video calls. "If you're leaving, just leave, take your money and go." "Because I need him to understand what he lost," Danya said softly. "I need him to see me, really see me, even if it's the last thing he ever sees clearly." But even while planning her exit, Danya kept trying to save her marriage. She scheduled a session with a couples therapist, begging Joel to come with her. "We don't need therapy," he said, not looking up from his phone. "We just need you to stop being so sensitive about everything." She planned a weekend trip to Crimson Peak, hoping the mountain would remind him of who they'd been. She booked a cabin, arranged everything, imagined them hiking to the overlook where they'd met, reconnecting with the simplicity they'd lost. "I can't," Joel said when she told him. "I have a golf game with potential investors that weekend. It's important." "We're important," Danya said. "This is important for us, for our future. You don't understand how business works." She understood exactly how business worked. She'd built and sold 3 companies before Joel even had his first successful pitch. But she didn't say that. She just cancelled the cabin and went to Crimson Peak alone. Standing on that overlook, wind whipping her hair, Dania felt the full weight of her loneliness crash over her. She was married, living in luxury, surrounded by everything money could buy, and she'd never felt more invisible, more worthless, more completely unseen. She pulled out her phone and looked through old photos from their first year. There was Joel, with flour on his face from their cooking disasters. There she was, paint-stained and laughing, natural hair wild. There they were, broke and happy and completely real with each other. When had they lost this? When had success become more important than connection? When had Joel stopped seeing her as a partner and started treating her as property? The tears came hard and fast, years of swallowed pain finally breaking free. Dania sobbed on that mountain, grieving not just for her marriage, but for the man Joel could have been. The man she'd believed in, invested in, loved with everything she had. She'd wanted to be his partner, not his bank account, his equal, not his servant. But somewhere along the way, Joel had decided he didn't need partners. He just needed people who served his vision of himself. Dania set up her easel on the mountain and painted one last sunset. But this time, there was no hope in the colors, no promise of tomorrow. Just the stark beauty of an ending, the violence of light dying, the finality of darkness falling. She titled it Goodbye and left it there on the mountain, facing the view. Let it weather and fade. Let the rain destroy it. Let it disappear like she was disappearing from her own life. When Dania drove home, she found Joel entertaining clients in their living room. He hadn't even noticed she'd been gone all day. "Where were you?" he snapped when the clients left. "I needed you here to play hostess. You're so selfish." Something inside Dania just stopped. The part of her that had been trying, hoping, believing, it simply gave up. "I'm sleeping in the guest room," she said. "Whatever. Do what you want." He didn't even ask why, didn't fight for her, didn't seem to care at all. That night, Dania moved her things into the guest bedroom and didn't move back. Joel never questioned it, never knocked on her door, never seemed to notice that his wife had essentially left him while still living in the same house. The months that followed were a strange kind of limbo. They existed in the same space but lived separate lives. Joel worked late, drank more, became increasingly critical of everything Dania did or didn't do. She documented everything, his verbal abuse, his drinking, the nights he came home smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. She didn't confront him about the cheating. What was the point? Their marriage had died long ago. The paperwork was just catching up to reality. But Dania still wasn't ready to file. Some stubborn part of her kept whispering that maybe, Joel would wake up one morning and remember Crimson Peak, remember who they'd been, remember that she was a person, not a possession. That hope died on a Friday evening when Joel came home drunk and angry about a deal that had fallen through. "This is your fault," he slurred, cornering her in the kitchen. "You distract me, you're useless. You don't contribute anything to this marriage except spending my money." "Your money?" The words escaped before Dania could stop them. "Yes, my money. I earned it. I built this company. You just sit around the house doing nothing all day." Dania looked at her husband, at his unfocused eyes, his sneer, his complete inability to see the truth even when it was standing right in front of him, and felt the last thread of hope snap. "You're right," she said calmly. "I should leave. Finally, something we agree on." She walked upstairs, packed a bag, and drove to a hotel. She texted Felix from the lobby. "I'm ready. Start the process." But when Joel called the next morning, sober and apologetic, Dania made the mistake of going back. He cried. He promised to change. He said he couldn't live without her. "I was drunk. I didn't mean any of it. You're everything to me, Dania. I love you. Please don't give up on us." So she went back. One more time. One last chance. Because love, even dying love, was a hard thing to kill. For 6 more months, Dania stayed. She played the role. She smiled at his events. She slept in the guest room and pretended everything was fine when people asked. And Joel went back to ignoring her, dismissing her, treating her like an inconvenient piece of furniture he'd bought and now regretted. Until the night of the charity gala, until Thomas Reeves recognized her, until Joel humiliated her in front of someone who actually knew her worth, until the ride home where he called her names, until he grabbed her, pushed her, called her more names that would leave scars deeper than bruises, until he hit her, and everything changed. Dania stood in their bathroom that night, looking at the bruises forming on her arms where he'd grabbed her, the split lip from his palm, the terror still making her hands shake. She looked at herself in the mirror and made a decision. No more hoping, no more waiting, no more believing in a man who no longer existed. Joel Pace had hit her, had laid hands on her in violence, had crossed a line so fundamental there was no coming back from it. Dania pulled out her phone and sent Felix 3 words: "Execute the plan." His response was immediate. "Already done. Everything's ready. Are you safe?" "I will be," she typed back. Then she did something she should have done months ago. She called the police. When they arrived, Joel was passed out drunk on the couch. He barely woke up when they photographed Dania's injuries, took her statement, documented everything. They asked if she wanted to press charges. She said she needed time to think, but she knew the answer was yes. Not because she wanted revenge, because she needed to stop this from ever happening again, to her or to anyone else Joel might trap with his charm and then destroy with his cruelty. After the police left, Dania went to the guest room and locked the door. She sat on the bed and finally let herself cry. Not quiet tears this time, but deep, wrenching sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart from the inside. She cried for the girl who'd met a broken man on a mountain and thought she could save him with love. She cried for the 5 years she'd spent invisible, trying to be enough for someone who would never see her. She cried for every small concession, every swallowed objection, every time she'd made herself smaller to make Joel feel bigger. And then she stopped crying. She wiped her face, opened her laptop, and sent an email to the divorce attorney Felix had already vetted. "I'm ready to file," she wrote. "I want everything documented. I want him to see exactly what he's losing, and I want to do it in a way he'll never forget." The attorney responded within an hour with a plan so perfect, so devastatingly theatrical, that Dania almost smiled. They would serve him the papers over breakfast, in his own house, with Felix and the attorney present to witness his reaction. They would lay out every document, every shell company, every hidden investment. They would show Joel Pace the empire he thought he'd built and reveal the foundation it actually stood on. They would make him see her, really see her. One last time. Dania spent the next week making quiet arrangements. She moved money, secured documents, prepared for the legal battle she knew Joel would wage. She also bought something she'd been thinking about for months. A white suit, custom-tailored, perfect. The color of new beginnings, the color of surrender flags, the color of brides and angels and everything pure that Joel had tried to corrupt. She would wear it the morning she served him divorce papers. She would stand in his house, in her armor, and watch his world collapse. And maybe, just maybe, in the rubble of his destroyed ego, Joel Pace would finally understand what he'd lost. Probably not. But Dania needed to try, because the woman who'd loved him deserved that closure, even if the woman wearing the white suit had already moved on. Chapter 7. The night everything shattered. The charity gala where everything ended started like all the others, a parade of expensive dresses, careful networking, and Joel Pace working the room like he owned it. Dania stood near the bar in a designer gown she hadn't chosen, her hair straightened into submission, playing the role she'd perfected over 3 years. The silent, beautiful wife, the perfect accessory, the woman who knew her place. Except tonight, she'd forgotten to stay small. Thomas Reeves had recognized her, had remembered her accomplishments, had treated her like the person she'd been before Joel. Successful, brilliant, worthy of respect. And for just a moment, Danya had allowed herself to be seen. That was her mistake. In the car ride home, Joel's hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, his silence more dangerous than any shouting. Danya watched the city lights blur past her window and felt dread settling heavy in her stomach. She knew this mood. She'd seen it building over months, the jealousy, the insecurity, the rage that came from his sense that he was losing control. "You made me look like nothing tonight," Joel said finally, his voice deadly quiet. "I was just being polite." He approached me. "You talk to him like you're somebody important, like you have something to contribute beyond being my wife." "Joel, he just recognized me from years ago. It was a simple conversation." "There's nothing simple about the way you embarrass me." His voice was rising now, flirting with one of the most powerful investors in tech, making me seem inadequate, making me look like I'm not enough for you. "I wasn't flirting. We were discussing technology trends. He asked about my background." "You don't have a background." Joel slammed his palm against the steering wheel. "You did some low-level administrative work before we met. That's it. That's all you'll ever be. But you stand there acting like you're on his level, like you're on my level, when you're just a housewife living off what I've built." Each word was a knife, but Danya had developed thick skin over the past 3 years. She stayed quiet, knowing that engaging would only make things worse. They pulled into their driveway and she moved to get out of the car as quickly as possible. Joel grabbed her arm, hard, his fingers dug into her flesh with bruising force. "We're not done talking. Let go of me. You need to understand something." His face was close now, and she could smell the bourbon on his breath. "Everything you have, I gave you. This house, these clothes, this life. You owe me everything, and the least you could do is show some gratitude instead of embarrassing me in front of people who matter." "People who matter?" Danya yanked her arm free. "Is that what I am to you? Someone who doesn't matter?" "You matter when you remember your role, when you make me look good, when you're useful." Something inside Danya finally irrevocably broke. 5 years of being diminished, dismissed, treated as property rather than person. It all crystallized into one perfect moment of clarity. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and final. Joel's expression shifted from anger to shock to something darker. "What did you say?" "I want a divorce. I can't do this anymore. I won't do this anymore." "You're not divorcing me." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You have nothing. You are nothing without me. Where would you even go?" "That's not your concern anymore." Danya got out of the car and walked toward the house. She heard his door slam, his footsteps behind her, but she kept walking. She just needed to get inside, lock herself in the guest room, call Felix. Joel grabbed her arm again in the foyer, spinning her around. "You're not leaving me. I won't allow it." "You don't get to allow or disallow anything." "I'm not asking for permission, Joel. I'm telling you it's over." "Because of one conversation with Thomas Reeves? Because I called you out for embarrassing me? You're that weak, that selfish?" "Because you don't love me. You haven't loved me in years. You love what you think I represent. You love having someone to control, but you don't actually see me, Joel. You never did." "I see you perfectly. I see an ungrateful woman who's forgotten that without me, she'd have nothing." "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Joel's grip tightened, and Danya felt genuine fear for the first time in their marriage. "I built Pace Digital Solutions from the ground up. I made every decision. I closed every deal. I turned $2 million in startup capital into a $50 million company. What did you do? You sat at home and spent my money. Let go of me. Not until you apologize. Not until you remember who you belong to." "I don't belong to anyone." Danya tried to pull away, but Joel's other hand came up, gripping her other arm, pushing her back against the wall of their foyer. His face was red, his eyes wild with rage and bourbon, and something she'd never seen before, the capacity for real violence. "You're my wife, mine. I made you into something. Without me, you're just some nobody who did administrative work at tech companies. With me, you're somebody. You're important. You matter. And you want to throw that away? I want to be free of you." The slap came so fast, Danya barely saw it coming. Joel's open palm connected with her face with enough force to snap her head to the side, split her lip, make her ears ring. For a moment, they both just stood there, shocked. Danya's hand came up to touch her bleeding lip, her eyes wide. Joel's chest was heaving, his hand still raised, frozen in the aftermath of what he'd done. "Danya, I don't." Her voice was eerily calm, despite the blood dripping onto her expensive gown. "Don't say anything." "I didn't mean you pushed me, you made me—" "I made you hit me? Is that what you're telling yourself?" Joel's expression shifted rapidly between remorse, justification, and anger. He grabbed her arms again, and this time there was nothing controlled about it. He shook her once, hard, slamming her back against the wall. "You don't get to leave me. You don't get to make me the bad guy. I've given you everything." "You've given me nothing," Danya shouted back, something breaking loose inside her. "I don't need anything from you. I never needed anything from you." Joel's fist connected with her ribs, then her arms, then her face again. Each blow was punctuated with words: ungrateful, selfish, worthless. Danya stopped fighting. She went limp, protecting her head as best she could, waiting for it to end. Some distant part of her brain was documenting everything, the words, the blows, the crossing of a line so fundamental that there was no walking it back. Finally, Joel stopped. He was breathing hard, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Danya slid down the wall, blood on her face, her body screaming with pain. "Get away from me," she whispered. "Danya, I'm sorry. I didn't mean... Get away from me, or I swear I will call the police right now." Something in her voice must have cut through his rage because Joel stepped back. He looked at her, really looked at her, and whatever he saw made him pale. Then he turned and stumbled to the living room, to the bar, to the bourbon that had become his closest companion. Danya sat on the foyer floor for a long time, letting the pain wash over her, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. Her husband had beaten her. The man she'd loved, invested in, sacrificed for, he'd put his hands on her in violence. And somewhere in the midst of the pain, Danya smiled, not from happiness, from the cold, clear certainty of someone who'd finally hit rock bottom and found it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. "Thank you," she whispered to no one, to herself, to the universe. "I needed this to stop hoping." She pulled herself up slowly, her body screaming protest. She walked past the living room where Joel sat with his head in his hands, past the kitchen where they'd shared 1,000 meals, up the stairs to the guest room where she'd been sleeping for months. She locked the door, pulled out her phone, texted Felix 3 words: "Execute the plan." His response was immediate. "Already done. Everything's ready. I'm calling the police now." "No," Danya typed back. "Tomorrow morning. Let him wake up to his new reality." She sat on the edge of the bed and took stock of her injuries in the mirror. Split lip, bruised cheekbone that would swell purple by morning, bruises forming on her ribs and arms, evidence, documentation, proof. She called her physician, the one she'd used for years before meeting Joel, the one who knew her medical history. She explained what happened. The doctor insisted on seeing her immediately, met her at a private clinic at midnight, documented every injury with photographs and detailed notes. When Danya returned home at 2 in the morning, she found Joel passed out on the couch, surrounded by empty bottles. He looked pathetic, small, nothing like the man she'd met on Crimson Peak. She went to her closet and pulled out the white suit she'd bought and hidden 3 months ago. Custom-tailored. Perfect. She laid it out carefully on the guest room chair, then set her alarm for 4 a.m. She didn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, her body aching, her mind crystal clear. She thought about Crimson Peak, about the woman she'd been before Joel, about the woman she was about to become again. At 4 a.m., Danya got up and went through her morning routine with deliberate care. She showered, careful around her injuries. She did her hair the way she wanted it, natural coils styled elegantly, beautifully, truly herself for the first time in years. She put on makeup to enhance her features but not hide the bruising. Let it show, let it be seen. Then she put on the white suit. The fabric was perfect, expensive, tailored to fit her exactly. It felt like armor. It felt like a flag of surrender. It felt like both an ending and a beginning. Danya looked at herself in the mirror and saw a stranger, or maybe she saw herself for the first time in years. The woman in the white suit wasn't Joel's wife anymore. She wasn't anyone's property. She was Danya Dawson, the woman who'd built 3 successful companies, who'd created a 9-figure fortune, who'd fallen in love and tried to save a broken man. She was also the woman who'd finally stopped trying to save anyone but herself. Danya went downstairs and started making pancakes. Not for Joel, for Felix and the divorce attorney who would arrive at 7 a.m. She made bacon, scrambled eggs, fresh cinnamon rolls, everything perfect, set the dining table beautifully with flowers and fine china. This was her stage. This was her moment. This was the morning Joel Pace would finally see her, and then lose her forever. She stood by the window in her white suit, watching the sun rise over the city, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Powerful, free, absolutely certain that she was doing the right thing. Joel woke up around 6, stumbled to the bathroom, then downstairs following the smell of food. Danya heard him coming and positioned herself by the window, backlit by morning sun. She heard him round the corner, heard him freeze, heard the confusion in his voice. Good, you finally understood your place. But when he saw who sat at the table, Felix and Lydia, eating his breakfast, holding files that would destroy his world, everything changed. Danya turned from the window and looked at her husband. Let him see the bruises on her face. Let him see the white suit that meant war and peace at once. Let him see her seeing him for exactly what he was. And she said the words she'd been practicing all night. You wanted a wife who knew her place, Joe. You're about to learn I was never below you. You were always beneath me. The look on his face, shock, confusion, the first stirrings of fear, was everything she'd needed to see. This was the morning Joel Pace lost everything. This was the morning Danya Dawson took it all back. Chapter 8. The Empire He Never Saw. 3 days after the divorce papers were served, Joel Pace's world continued its spectacular collapse. He'd spent the first day in stunned silence, reading through the documents Felix and Lydia had left on his dining table. Every page was a revelation, a punch to the gut, a piece of his reality crumbling. Shell companies bearing Danya's name, investment records showing her funding every major business move he'd made, communications proving she'd arranged his breakthrough clients, his entire empire built on her invisible foundation. The second day, Joel hired lawyers, or tried to. The first 3 firms he contacted declined immediately after hearing his name. The 4th agreed to a consultation, took one look at Danya's documentation, and politely suggested he settle. Mr. Pace, I'll be direct with you. This is indefensible. Your wife has documentation showing she funded your entire business through various investment vehicles. She arranged your major contracts through her personal relationships. She even owns the property you're currently living in. If this goes to trial, you'll be eviscerated. She can't just take everything I built. She's not taking what you built, sir. According to these documents, she is what you built. Without her money and connections, Pace Digital Solutions wouldn't exist. Joel fired that lawyer and hired another. Then another. Each told him the same thing. The documentation was airtight. The paper trail was perfect. Danya had spent years quietly ensuring that every dollar, every contract, every success could be traced back to her, and now she was calling it all in. On the 3rd day, Joel made his biggest mistake. He called a reporter. He was drunk, angry, desperate to control the narrative. He told the journalist from Tech Business Daily that his wife was lying, trying to steal his company, claiming credit for his success. He painted himself as the victim of a gold-digging spouse who wanted to destroy him out of spite. The reporter, a young woman named Kimberly, listened patiently. Then she said, "Mr. Pace, are you aware of who your wife actually is?" What do you mean? She's just Dania Dawson. She sold her first startup, a mobile analytics platform, for $15 million when she was 26. Her second company, a user experience consultancy, went for $38 million. Her third venture, a data visualization tool, sold for $89 million. She's been featured in Forbes, Fast Company, and Tech Innovator magazine. She's a keynote speaker at industry conferences, or was, before she disappeared from public view about 5 years ago. Joel's mouth went dry. That can't be. Mr. Pace, your wife is one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs of her generation. She's worth an estimated $340 million, and according to public records, she's been funding your company since its inception. Would you like to comment on why you've been telling people she did low-level administrative work before marrying you? Joel hung up. The article published the next morning. Tech mogul's hidden benefactor. Dania Dawson's secret philanthropy revealed, ran with side-by-side photos. Dania from her tech days, confident and powerful at a conference podium, next to a recent photo of her at one of Joel's charity galas, subdued and silent at his side. The article went viral. Other journalists started digging. They found the shell companies. They interviewed people who'd worked with Dania in her tech days, who expressed shock that she'd disappeared. They talked to industry insiders, who confirmed she'd arranged Joel's major contracts. They pulled financial records showing the flow of money from her accounts to his business, and they reported on the domestic violence incident. Joel's phone exploded with calls, messages, interview requests. His business partners started distancing themselves. Clients called for meetings to discuss concerns. His board of directors sent a formal letter requesting he take a leave of absence while the situation was clarified. Joel sat in his house, Dania's house, he now knew, surrounded by furniture she'd bought, eating food he'd ordered with credit cards she'd co-signed, and watched his reputation burn on social media. People were calling him a fraud, an abuser, a man who'd built his success on his wife's money and connections while treating her like property. They demanded he step down from his company. They called for his removal from boards and committees. They organized boycotts. Joel wanted to fight back, but every lawyer told him the same thing. Shut up, settle the divorce, hope to salvage something from the wreckage. On the fourth day, Joel received an email from Felix. No subject line, just 3 sentences. Every contract is void, every asset returned to its rightful owner. I told Dania 7 years ago that you would break her heart. I promised her 7 years ago that when you did, I would make sure you never profited from her pain. That promise is now kept. Joel stared at that email for an hour, the cold finality of it, the long game Felix had been playing, protecting Dania even while she was protecting Joel. The realization that he'd been surrounded by people who saw him clearly and let him hang himself anyway. That evening, Joel drove to Crimson Peak. He stood at the overlook where he'd met Dania 7 years ago, where his life had actually begun, even though he'd been too desperate to realize it. The sun was setting in those same impossible colors, painting the sky with fire and violence and beauty all at once. Joel thought about that day, about standing at this edge, broken and considering ending everything, about the barefoot painter who'd made him laugh, who'd shared her food, who'd danced with him on this clifftop like he was worth something. She'd saved him that day, and he'd spent the next 7 years destroying the woman who'd saved him. Joel fell to his knees on the rocky ground and sobbed, not for the business he was losing, not for the reputation in ruins, not for the money or status or success. He cried for her, for Dania, for the woman who'd loved him when he had nothing, who'd believed in him when he didn't believe in himself, who'd built an entire empire and handed it to him wrapped in a bow because she'd thought he was good, because she'd seen potential in him. And he'd treated her like property, like an accessory, like nothing. "I'm sorry," Joel whispered to the wind, to the valley, to the ghost of who they'd been. "I'm so sorry." But sorry was 7 years too late. Sorry didn't undo the bruises. Sorry didn't erase the verbal abuse, the dismissals, the night he'd put his hands on her in violence. Sorry was just another word that Joel Pace thought could buy him what he wanted. Joel drove home as darkness fell. His phone was full of messages from reporters, lawyers, former friends distancing themselves. The board had officially voted to remove him from his position as CEO. His company, Dania's company really, would be dismantled or sold, its assets returned to its true owner. He sat in the living room of the house he'd never actually owned and realized he had nothing. He was 28 years old again, broke and desperate, and completely alone. Except this time, there was no barefoot painter to save him. No woman with paint-stained hands and impossible hope. No Dania believing he could be better than he was. This time, Joel Pace would have to save himself, if he even could, if he even deserved to. Chapter 9. The Woman Who Built Cathedrals. 6 months after the divorce finalized, Dania Dawson stood in a small studio apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean and watched the sunrise paint the water in shades of rose and gold. The apartment was tiny compared to the house she'd left behind. 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, a living space barely big enough for a couch and her easel. But it was hers. Really, truly hers. She'd rented it under her own name, furnished it with pieces she'd chosen, filled it with her paintings and books and the sound of her own breathing. For the first time in 5 years, Dania was alone, and it felt like freedom. The divorce had been swift once Joel stopped fighting. He'd signed everything, taken nothing, disappeared from her life as completely as she'd once disappeared into his. Dania had heard through Felix that Joel had moved across the country, taken a regular job at a mid-level tech company, was living quietly and simply. She felt nothing about that. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even anger anymore. Joel Pace had become a chapter in her story, not the whole book, and she'd moved on to writing new pages. Dania had relocated to a small coastal city where nobody knew her name or her history. She let her money sit in investments managed by Felix and lived off a modest stipend that covered her simple needs. She dressed in clothes she chose, jeans and paint-stained shirts, sundresses that felt like freedom, her natural hair wild and beautiful and completely herself. She painted every day, sunrises from her window, the beach at low tide, strangers she met in coffee shops. She sold some pieces at a local gallery under a pseudonym, prices based on the art itself, not the name. The money didn't matter. What mattered was creating again, putting her vision into the world, remembering who she'd been before she'd tried to become someone else's idea of enough. On Thursday evenings, Dania taught a community art class at the local rec center. Beginners, mostly older folks or kids whose parents couldn't afford private lessons. She charged nothing, just showed up with supplies and encouragement and the belief that everyone deserved to create. That's where she met him. Kwame Baptiste appeared in her class on a Thursday in October, apologizing for being late. He was mid-40s with kind eyes, close-cropped hair graying at the temples, and hands that moved with careful precision. He wore paint-speckled jeans and a shirt that had seen better days. "Is there still room?" he asked, in an accent that carried the music of somewhere else. I saw the flyer and thought, perhaps tonight I should try something new. "There's always room," Dania said, gesturing to an empty easel. Kwame came back the next week, and the week after that. He was terrible at painting, all stiff lines and apologetic brushstrokes, but he showed up consistently, worked diligently, and always stayed after to help clean brushes and stack chairs. On his 4th week, Dania asked, "What do you do, Kwame, when you're not massacring innocent canvases?" He laughed, a warm sound that filled the whole room. "I'm an architect. I design buildings, try to create spaces where people feel safe, seen, valued. Though I'm beginning to think I understand structure better than color. Architecture and painting aren't so different. Both are about vision, about seeing what could exist and making it real. Yes, but when I make mistakes with buildings, they don't look quite so tragic." He gestured to his canvas, which was indeed a disaster of muddy colors and uncertain composition. "Let me guess. You're too focused on getting it right. You're thinking instead of feeling." "How did you know?" Because that's what careful people do. People who build things for a living, who understand consequences. You're trying to control the paint instead of dancing with it. Kwame studied her thoughtfully. And you? What do you do when you're not teaching disasters like me? I paint. I watch sunrises. I try to remember what it means to just exist without performing. Something in his expression shifted, like he'd heard the words beneath her words. That sounds like hard-won wisdom. The expensive kind, Danya agreed. After that, they started talking more. Kwame would arrive early to class, help Danya set up, tell her about his current projects. He was designing a community center for an underserved neighborhood, working for less money than he could make because the project mattered. He talked about architecture as service, as creating dignity through space. Danya found herself looking forward to Thursdays, found herself noticing when Kwame laughed, how his whole face lit up, found herself feeling something she thought had died when Joel hit her, the possibility of connection without fear. It took Kwame 3 months to ask her to coffee. He did it nervously, like a teenager instead of a grown man. I understand if this is inappropriate. You're my teacher, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable. But I wonder if you might like to have coffee sometime. Not as student and teacher, just as two people who both seem to appreciate sunrises and good conversation. Danya said yes. Their first coffee lasted 6 hours. They talked about everything, childhoods and lost loves, and what made a life worthwhile. Kwame told her about growing up in Haiti, immigrating with his family as a teenager, learning to navigate being black in America while maintaining his connection to where he came from. He told her about his wife, who died of cancer 3 years ago after 18 years of marriage, about his daughter, Amelie, who was 19 and studying engineering at the State University. I wasn't sure I'd ever want to share my life with someone again, Kwame said quietly, stirring his cold coffee without drinking it. After losing someone you love that deeply, it feels safer to just stay alone. But then I met you, and I thought, perhaps safe isn't always the same as living. Danya told him about Joel. Not everything. Not the bruises or the white suit or the morning she'd destroyed his world, but enough. About loving someone who couldn't see her. About losing herself, trying to be enough for someone who'd wanted her small. I thought I was good at reading people, she said. I built companies based on understanding human motivation, but I missed every sign with him. Or maybe I just wanted to believe people could change if you loved them hard enough. People can change, Kwame said gently, but only if they want to. You can't love someone into becoming a better person. You can only love them and then decide if who they actually are is someone you can live with. Danya looked at this man across from her, this widower with paint under his fingernails and grief in his eyes and kindness in every word, and felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, opening, like a door she'd kept locked suddenly letting in light. Tell me, she said. Tell me about her. Your wife. What made her special? Kwame's eyes filled with tears, but his smile was genuine. She laughed at my terrible jokes. She called me out when I was being stubborn. She believed I could design buildings that changed lives, even when I wasn't sure myself. She made being loved feel easy. She sounds remarkable. She was. And I imagine your former husband lost something equally remarkable when he lost you. I don't know about that. I do. Kwame reached across the table, not touching her, but close. I've watched you teach for 3 months now. I've seen how you encourage people who think they can't create anything beautiful. I've heard how you talk about art, about life, about seeing things clearly. You're someone special, Danya. Whatever he couldn't see, that was his blindness, not your inadequacy. Danya cried right there in the coffee shop. Not from pain, but from the shock of being seen again. Really seen. Not for what she could provide or how she could make someone else feel important, just seen for who she actually was. Kwame handed her napkins and waited patiently while she composed herself. I'm sorry, she said. That was human, he interrupted. That was human. Don't apologize for being human. They started dating slowly, carefully. Kwame introduced her to Amélie over Sunday dinner. His daughter was brilliant and guarded, clearly protective of her father. But she warmed to Danya when she realized Danya wasn't trying to replace her mother or rush anything. "Dad says you're an artist," Amélie said, helping clear dishes after the meal. "I try to be. Mostly I make messes and hope some of them turn into something meaningful. He also says you're the first person he's met since Mom died who makes him remember why living matters." Danya looked at this fierce, grieving girl protecting her father. "Your dad is one of the kindest people I've ever met. But you don't have to worry. I'm not trying to take anything from either of you. I'm just trying to see where this goes." "Good," Amélie said, "because if you hurt him, I know how to hide bodies. Engineering skills." They stared at each other for a beat, then both burst out laughing. Danya and Kwame built their relationship with intention. No rushing, no assumptions, just time spent together, learning each other's rhythms. They had dinner dates and hiking dates and dates where they just sat in comfortable silence, reading in the same room. On their third date, Kwame took her to a construction site at dawn. "I want to show you something most people never see." They climbed scaffolding to the top floor of an unfinished community center he'd designed. The building was just steel and concrete and possibility, floors open to the sky. They stood at what would become a window, harnessed safely, and watched the sun rise through the skeleton of his vision. "This is my favorite part," Kwame said softly, "when it's still becoming, still full of possibility. Before anyone's decided what it means or how it should be used, right now, it could become anything." Danya looked at him, this man who built spaces for people to flourish, who understood that beauty and function weren't opposites but partners, and felt herself falling, not the desperate, consuming love she'd felt for Joel, something steadier, deeper, more real. She kissed him there, 40 feet above the ground, with sunrise painting the unfinished walls gold and pink. When they pulled apart, Kwame was smiling. "I wasn't sure you felt the same way." "I wasn't sure I could feel this way again," Danya admitted. "But you make me want to try. You make me believe in building instead of breaking." "Then let's build," Kwame said simply. "Whatever we create together, let's make sure it's honest. No pretending, no performing, just two whole people choosing to share space." That night, Danya told him everything. About her money, her companies, Joel, the white suit, all of it. She laid out her history like cards on a table and waited to see if it would scare him away. Kwame listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for trusting me with your story," he said finally. "Now let me tell you mine." He told her about losing his wife, about the months afterward when he couldn't design anything because beauty felt like betrayal, about Amélie pulling him through the grief, forcing him to keep living when he wanted to stop, about slowly remembering that loving someone and losing them didn't mean love itself was pointless. "We both know what it means to start over," he said, "to rebuild from ruins. Maybe that's why we found each other. Maybe we're both ready to build something new." "What if I mess this up?" Danya whispered. "What if I'm too damaged, too broken?" "You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference." Kwame took her hand. "And whatever we build, we'll build it together. One day at a time. One choice at a time. No rushing, no pressure, just possibility." Danya squeezed his hand and let herself believe. Maybe, just maybe, second chances were real. Maybe, just maybe, she deserved one. Chapter 10. The Cathedral of Two Hearts. 2 years after her divorce, Danya Dawson stood in Kwame Baptiste's arms on Crimson Peak and said yes to forever. They'd come back to the mountain where her old life had begun and ended, but this time she wasn't alone. Kwame stood beside her at the stone wall where she'd once met a broken man, but now she stood next to someone whole, someone who saw her completely and loved her anyway, someone who built with her instead of on top of her. The proposal had been perfectly Kwame, thoughtful, surprising, deeply personal. He'd taken her to the community center they'd designed together over the past year. Their partnership had started with a conversation over coffee about her investment portfolio and his architectural vision, and had grown into something neither expected, a business built on shared values. Cornerstone Collaborative specialized in designing community spaces for underserved neighborhoods. Dania handled the business strategy, securing funding and managing investments. Kwame led the design team, creating buildings that honored the people who would use them. Together, they'd completed 3 community centers, 2 affordable housing projects, and a dozen other structures that prioritized dignity over profit. It wasn't about building an empire this time. It was about building spaces where people could flourish. On the day of the proposal, they'd gone to the community center for its opening ceremony. Families filled the space, kids running through rooms designed for their joy, parents attending workshops in classrooms built for their growth. Dania watched it all with tears in her eyes. This was what success actually looked like. Not bank accounts or status. Impact, connection, purpose. Kwame had taken her hand and led her to the main hall, to a small detail she'd never noticed before. Set into the wall was a mosaic made of colored glass and tile. Abstract at first glance, but when you stood in exactly the right spot and the light hit it correctly, the pieces aligned to spell out words. "Dania, will you build the rest of our cathedral with me?" She'd turned around to find him on one knee, Amelie crying happy tears beside him, holding a ring he'd designed himself. Simple but perfect, like everything about Kwame, a band of rose gold with a single stone that caught the light like sunrise. "I'm not asking you to complete me," Kwame said, his voice shaking slightly. "You're already whole. I'm whole. But I'm asking if 2 whole people want to build something extraordinary together, a life that matters, a partnership that honors both of us. A cathedral, not an empire." Dania had said yes through tears and laughter and the overwhelming sense that she'd finally found her way home. Now, 6 months later, they stood on Crimson Peak at sunset, preparing to marry in front of 30 people who actually mattered. Amelie stood as Dania's maid of honor, having become more like a daughter than a stepdaughter over the past 2 years. Felix was there, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. A few close friends from Dania's tech days who'd welcomed her back when she was ready. Kwame's colleagues and family members who'd flown in from Haiti. No expensive gala, no performance, just people they loved, gathered on a mountain where both Dania's first marriage had begun and her second would start. Dania wore a simple dress she'd chosen herself, flowing white fabric that moved in the wind. Her natural hair was loose, adorned with wildflowers Amelie had helped her pick that morning. She felt beautiful. Not because of the dress or the flowers, but because Kwame looked at her like she was the sunrise itself. They'd written their own vows. Kwame went first, his voice carrying across the overlook. "Dania, you taught me that building cathedrals starts with building yourself first. You showed me that love doesn't require sacrifice of self, but celebration of it. I promise to see you every day, really see you, and honor what I see. I promise to build spaces with you where both our dreams fit. I promise to love you not despite your strength, but because of it." Dania's turn. She looked at this man who'd given her back herself. "Kwame, you taught me that starting over isn't failure, it's courage. You showed me that love can be steady instead of consuming, partnership instead of performance. I promise to build with you, not for you. I promise to show up as my whole self and make space for your whole self. I promise that when we create our cathedral, every stone will be placed by both our hands." They exchanged rings as the sun painted the sky in those same impossible colors Dania had captured in paintings a decade ago. When the officiant pronounced them married, they kissed to the sound of cheers and the wind and the vast open possibility of the valley below. The reception was dinner at a restaurant in town, toasts that made everyone laugh and cry, dancing to old jazz under string lights. Dania danced with Kwame like they had nowhere else to be, nothing to prove, just this moment and each other. Felix cornered her during a quiet moment, pulling her into a fierce hug. "You did it," he whispered. "You found your way back." "I had help," Dania said, looking at Kwame across the room, talking animatedly with Amelie about some architectural concept. "He didn't save me, But he made space for me to save myself. That's the difference, Felix said. That's everything. 5 years later, Danya stood in the home office she shared with Kwame, looking at the wall where two paintings hung side by side. On the left was the dark, stormy sunset she'd painted the night she'd given up on Joel, the one she'd titled Goodbye. On the right was the painting from her wedding day, bright, hopeful, full of light. Same place, different heart, different life. Cornerstone Collaborative had grown into something nationally recognized. They'd designed 50 community centers, dozens of affordable housing projects, spaces that changed lives across the country. They worked side by side every day, challenged each other, supported each other, built something that mattered beyond themselves. Danya still painted, Kwame still designed buildings, but their greatest creation was the life they'd built together, messy and real, and completely honest. That evening, working late on a proposal for a new project, Kwame looked up from his blueprints and asked the question he'd asked a few times over the years. Do you ever think about him? Danya considered it honestly. Sometimes. Not with anger anymore. Just sadness for who he could have been if he'd been willing to do the work. If he'd valued partnership over ownership. His loss, my miracle. Danya walked to the window overlooking the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the water in gold and pink. She thought about Crimson Peak, about the barefoot painter who'd saved a broken man, about the white suit she'd worn to end a marriage, about the simple dress she'd worn to start a new one. I spent 7 years trying to save a man who didn't want to be saved, she said. Now I get to spend the rest of my life building cathedrals with a man who already knows how to love. Kwame wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood together watching the sunset. Amelie called from downstairs about dinner. She was visiting from grad school, filling their house with energy and laughter, and the constant low-level chaos of a young person trying to solve the world's problems. Their life was full, messy, real, beautiful. Danya looked at both paintings one last time, the dark and the light, the ending and the beginning, the evidence of a journey from broken to whole. Then she turned away from them toward the sound of family and laughter and home. Some sunsets marked endings, but the best ones promised new dawns. And Danya Dawson had finally found hers, not because someone had given it to her, because she'd built it herself, with her own hands and heart and vision. And this time, she'd chosen to share it with someone worthy of the gift. The end.